Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Canton,
I'm Ed Sullivan.
and today we're going to be talking about naming things. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And Ed, you can go first.
Okay. I'm in the States, so I just had Thanksgiving. I've got an extra long weekend. I had Thursday, I took Friday, and I've got the weekend, so 4 days, enjoying some time with family. Writing, not so much this past week, but a little bit yesterday and today in conjunction with the podcast. I'm busy doing my work for the magazine. December 1st, Cheap Jack Pulp comes out, the winter quarterly, and I'm getting all the I's dotted and the T's crossed for the December issue of Cheap Jack Pulp. And that usually takes me about a day and a half. And I've got to edit a couple of stories myself personally, then coordinate with the other senior editor, John. And then he usually does all of his great volume of work and then leaves it to me, and I do the formatting and the posting. And then once I have December up, I go ahead and I publish the physical version of and the ebook of September. So I basically let people read all the new stuff for free, and then I archive it physically in a paperback and an ebook, and hope that people will help me recoup my expenses for the magazine. That's about it.
For me, not so much writing, but I was going to share a few things, so I will share my desktop just to show off. So, if people no, that's not right. If people remember last week, I was saying, okay, so I think everyone on my list wants to read Sword and Sorcery, so I'm going to dedicate next year to Sword and Sorcery, especially. So you can probably see on the screen, I did a survey among my readers. Now, most people didn't respond. Well, like I would say 20% maybe responded, 25%. So if you can see at the top, space opera. At the second one, military sci-fi. Right down here with 20 is Sword and Sorcery. So
Wow.
I was way off. Like 2.5 times as many people want to read military sci-fi or like combined, that's 100. Space opera and military sci-fi are not a million miles away from each other. So the people who like military sci-fi might read the space opera and vice versa, but they don't necessarily like Sword and Sorcery. So my plan to spend all of 2017 writing Sword and Sorcery would have been this amount of readers, maybe with the anything funny put in. So maybe 41 instead of 100, which just shows that we don't have a clue and we need to find out. That's running a survey like this meant that I can. It does two things. The first is Chris Fox has been talking about don't send emails about a military sci-fi book to your Sword and Sorcery people, because if they buy it, then Amazon's algorithms get confused and don't know what kind of book it is. So this is essentially split my list up. So if I bring out a military sci-fi book, I won't bother sending it to everyone who's not interested in it. I'll send it to the people who want to read it, and they probably read military sci-fi otherwise. So it does that, and it also told me that no, don't do that. Do military sci-fi, which is fine. I read military sci-fi. I don't mind writing it, so that's good to hear. That was the first thing I did this week. The second thing I did was I managed to finish a function on Writer Tracker, which shows how much writing. So when I sit down to write something, I use this here, which times how long I write for. If I refer, it's a bit buggy at the moment. I only just put it together, but you see the timer is counting up. So if I press start session, it starts counting, and whenever I'm finished, I can write a comment and I can write how many words I wrote and that kind of stuff. And I've been doing that. If you see, once it loads, you see on the graph, I've been doing it since, what's that, about October 2015. Before that, I would just record half-hour sessions. So if it was 25 minutes, I'd say half an hour. If it was 45 minutes, I'd say half an hour. And it's a little bit like it's mostly rounded up. So in total, since 2013, I've written almost 3,500 hours and almost 1.5 million words. But the interesting bit is, if I say 2015, you see, I wrote for 1,104 hours, which is about 3 hours a day, and I wrote about 405,000 words. And if I go to 2016, you can see that I wrote only for 274 hours, and you see all these gaps here.
Yeah.
Here and here and here and here. And even the ones when it's writing, it's not all that much. That's this writer tracker. Like that's that eating up. Like I haven't worked less hours this year. Well, maybe a little bit slower than before. But like essentially 2/3 of my time or more has been used on this app instead of using it on writing. But on the plus side, 238,000 words written. So the previous year is 405. So more than half as much for less than half as much time, for almost a quarter of the time. So essentially my process has gotten so much better that it takes me much less time to write a book than it used to. Which all of which is quite interesting stuff, because both of those things tell me something I didn't know before. Like the first thing, like the MailChimp stuff says, don't go writing sword and sorcery for a year, write military sci-fi for a year and you'll get twice as many or more people interested. And the writer tracker thing says that even though it seems like I worked really hard this year, I focused on things that aren't writing and ended up writing almost half as much as I had the year before. So what that says is that if next year I concentrated on military sci-fi and I did more writing and less app building, then potentially I could write an entire series, if not more, in the year. And at the same time, me and Dave are going to maybe continue the Dragons and Magic as long as it keeps selling. So that means that I'll cover the sword and sorcery people anyway. I just won't be like snowing them under with books. I'll cover both sides fully. So that was quite interesting week. Like not much. What I'm thinking of, the plan is then maybe for the rest of the year to maybe finish up some little app stuff and then kind of draw a line under it, and then for 2017 concentrate hard on the writing. And potentially, since there hasn't been all that much interest in the app, which I understand, because my thesis, my guess is that most authors want ways to write something they've already, or ways to sell something they've already written, not ways to write the next one better. I could be wrong, but like someone has a book out or someone has a bunch of books out and they're not selling, they don't want to hear that, oh yeah, forget about them, beta read the next one and then fix that and it'll do better, because that's a big load of work. Maybe I could be wrong.
Right. Well, it might be that way. It also might not be right.
The exact same thing is true. Like if I did a survey, maybe everyone would say, oh yeah, I've already got beta reading covered, or I use a professional editor so I don't need it, or I this or that or the other, or your app sucks and I don't want to use it, or like anything could be true.
But if you write a better book, you will have more success too. I mean, yeah. But absolutely. But that might not be what the average writer wants. You might be selling to people that are the elite, that understand that. 8 out of 10 may just want, flashy marketing software, and you might be shooting for a small market of very good writers who understand that. But then, so you won't get a lot of people using your app, but the people that use your app will be the highly proficient.
Yeah.
Who understand.
And as well, the whole point of making it, so my approach on the app may be that I start putting out stuff that's more buggy and less tested. Now that sounds bad, but what I'm thinking is that if it's just me and you and Dave, which is all it is at the moment, that putting out more features faster and just letting it be buggy and then fixing the bugs as we find them, rather than me spending a week testing it or 3 weeks testing it, maybe a better use of time, because then you find the bugs as you use the software, and then you shoot me an email or whatever and say, hey, this doesn't work, or this fell over or something. Because the important part was to make sure that it was bug free for readers, because the readers have to have a nice experience, otherwise they're not going to use the system. But we authors maybe could put up with a bit more crap than the readers. And if I can put it,
how many readers are on there?
About 20, I think, something like that. And yeah, I mean, like when your next book is ready, or even if you want to beta read something, I can kind of shoot a email to people and say, hey, there is another book up there if people want to have a look. But anyway, so my point being that what I want is to do the minimum amount of work so that it works for me and you and Dave and and maybe a small group of people, whoever signs up, but not necessarily invest my entire year next year into that. Oh, and the last thing I did, as if I hadn't done enough, was I started withdrawing all of my books from Smashwords, Kobo, iBooks, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to go Kindle exclusive. And that's because I was reading Chris Fox's book, his new book, was it 4-figure author, 5-figure author, some 5,000 words a day. Like his new one where he's saying how to sell loads of money. I think it's 6-figure author. Anyway, it's a very good book. It's very, like, I love Chris Fox's books because they're concise. Like, he doesn't BS. Like a lot of writing books, it's like, let me tell you the story of how I began my writing. No, he's just like, do this and then this and then this and this will work.
Yeah.
It's much better. Anyway, but his new book, he was saying that he's now Kindle Unlimited because the others are all merchandising stores. So he had a deal with iBooks where they were saying, hey, come, don't be Kindle Unlimited exclusive for your books. Come here and we'll set up all this merchandising. We'll make, you know, your book of the month and all that kind of stuff. So he did that and he sold a load of books for a month and then it went dead because there's no discovery on iBooks and Kobo and all the rest of them. It's all just merchandising. So if you're not on the front page, no one can see you. So he said, okay, forget that, because Amazon has discoverability, then I'll go there and I'll concentrate on fixing it so that that sells better than all the rest combined. And he said, so everyone says, don't put all your eggs in the one basket. If Amazon changes the rules, you're screwed, all that kind of stuff. And he said, well, it works right now, so why lose out right now? And then if it all goes wrong tomorrow, we're only on a 3-month contract with Amazon. We can always pull it out.
Right.
So, yeah, so I'm going to see if I can go that way. But that's a big change because I have perma-free series starters, and then I have second in series is free to the mailing lists as like a magnet. So I'm thinking I have to come up with a new reader magnet so that those books can be Kindle Unlimited exclusive, or else I need to say that the first 2 books in each series aren't Kindle Unlimited there, so that I can then give them out to my mailing list,
right,
and not break the terms of service.
Right.
Yeah,
anyway. The magazines, I put Cheap Jack, Kindle Unlimited, and 16 Queen is not. But that might change because I'm not getting any sales from the others, and I get absolutely no love from iBooks. Apple, I put everything through Draft to Digital, and Apple kicks back almost everything I submit for one reason or another. They're very persnickety through draft to digital on anything I've ever done. So I might just do Kindle Unlimited. If I ever got any measure of success, I suppose I would go back and forth with Kobo, because Mark Lefebvre seems pretty open to helping people. But and honestly, I've never gotten I've screwed up anytime I've tried to use other platforms to end up perma-free. I need to do some investigating, because I've never been able to successfully do that. I've had people flag Amazon and say, "Hey, it's free over on Barnes and Noble and Kobo," and they've done nothing.
Oh, you have to email them. You can't just press that, tell us about a lower price thing. That doesn't work.
Oh, there's my answer.
Yeah. So you have to go into your Kindle dashboard, and then you go contact us or something like that. And you say
through Author Central.
Yeah, through Author Central, and then you email them and you say, "Hey, my book is free. I wondered, would you be interested in price matching? Here is all the links where it's free." And then you give them the links so they can actually click. Don't say it's free everywhere else. Please match it. Make it like a 5-second job for them to check. So then you give them all the links, and then at the end, I always put, I understand that this is completely at Amazon's discretion, but I think it would be in the best interests of readers or whatever if this was free also on Amazon. And then thanks for your time or whatever.
I've also dragged my feet and waited till I've had something that's the second in a series.
Well,
I was going to put Sixth Day Queen perma-free when there's nothing to follow it. So,
yeah, that's like, so people, the general consensus is at a maximum, there has to be 3 months until the next book comes out. 2 months is better. 1 month is even better than that, because people forget about you almost instantly. So if you put Sixth Day Queen perma-free and someone reads it and they go, "I love it," and your number 2 is coming out in a year's time or something, there'll be no sales from it.
Right. I'm actually going to wait until the number 2 was out on something before, and then go back and backtrack and put number 1, because that's the only way that seemed to. So.
Yeah, I mean, so perma-free in general has been amazing for me, and the best it's been has been Hard Vacuum, which ends on a semi cliffhanger. So it ends the story, but there's like but the bad guy, you haven't got to the ultimate bad guy yet, and she's like, "I'm going to get that bad guy," and then find out what happens in the next book. That's about 5%. It goes up to 10% some months, but 5% about. So
now, in terms of today's theme, wasn't Hard Vacuum? That's the one you renamed that, didn't you?
I renamed all the other books in the series. So they were called Hard Vacuum 1, Hard Vacuum 2, Hard Vacuum 3.
Okay.
And then the SPP guys were talking about it. They said Unicorn Western was called that. Unicorn Western 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then people went, "Oh, well, that's just a part of a greater book because of the name," which to me made sense. That it sounds like it's just episodes within a larger work, not their own kind of thing. Whereas these are full novels. So I then thought, okay, I'm going to change the name, and I want to make it so that it's blindingly obvious what the genre is. So I went to the Kindle Spy. I don't know if you used it.
No, not yet.
It's a little plugin for Chrome or Firefox, and it looks at the top 100 in a genre or a search, and finds all of the keywords. So I did that. I searched for all the titles that already existed, which came up with 200 different words, and then I sorted them all and started mixing and matching them. So all the sci-fi, like military sci-fi kind of words, and came up with Planet Zero, because there was lots of books with zero in it and lots of books with planet in it, and Planet Zero is very apparently a sci-fi book. And then the next one, violent science, because it's violent and there's science fiction. And the next one's called Killer President. So because Kyra, spoiler alert, I guess, Kyra becomes president, and she's quite capable of being a killer. So so I haven't written that yet. That is. I was wondering about it for a while because I didn't know what the genre was, but it seems to me from the fan response that it's military sci-fi. Because she was a sergeant in a space marine kind of thing. And then she's managed to survive her tour of duty, and then she came back, and then terrorists keep bugging her and she keeps killing them. So she's a space marine. So even though most of it happens on Earth, it's military sci-fi, I guess. It's not like it's not like Battlestar Galactica or something like that. You couldn't say it's exactly like all the other military sci-fi books, but that's probably the closest match. So I'm thinking that that's probably the first book I'll write next year will be that. And then I'm considering whether that's going to be the last book in the series, because I've got a military sci-fi book that I've wanted to write for a long time, that's been just waiting on the back burner because I thought everyone wanted sword and sorcery. So I was trying to, satisfy the fans. And also I spent too much time writing paranormal and stuff like that this year, which was kind of silly. But
how apprehensive were you when you did that name change? Were you afraid to change that? See, because that I named Sixteen Queen when I was writing it during NaNoWriMo, and I feel like I got a little fancy. I went and I searched for words that were fantasy but were kind of sexy, and I wanted to be real cerebral, and then I the six is because it obviously has some mirrors of kind of the Seven Samurai kind of thing. And then I actually looked up, and I didn't even spell Fane like most people spell Fane. I spelled it Old English. And then queen is not even the same word as what people imagine queen. And but that was my first thing that I ever did. That my first real project. And I named it. And then the farther I got vested into that name, the more I wanted to keep it, the more scared I got of changing it. But I've always passive aggressively disliked it because I thought that at the time I was being too fancy, and I don't want to say I need to dumb it down, but if people don't know what the words in the title mean, they're not going to grab it.
I mean, I think there's two ways of coming up with the title. There's the title that intrigues people, and there's the title that tells you what it is. If you're going to try and intrigue people, it has to be a really what the hell's that kind of title. I'm trying to think of, is there any titles on my shelf that match that? But I think if you're not going to do that, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do, then at the moment at least, I'm trying to nail the genre, that someone can see that title and even without the book cover go, oh, I know what that genre is. So if I was going to write a crime, I would write, John Steele and the Mystery of the Lost Fang or something like that. Really obvious that that's a mystery. Right. So because what you're trying to do with the title and the cover and the product description is tell people what the book is, so that then when they buy it, that they're not confused. Which is another thing, actually, I forgot to mention that I did this week. I scanned, or I copy pasted all my reviews of Hard Vacuum, and then I did a word cloud where you take the most common words.
Yep.
And I rewrote my product description so that it matched the word cloud. So I took 10 words that popped up all the time in reviews, and I changed my product description to match, so that I wanted to be What I want is that the reader who should be reading it reads it, and the reader who shouldn't be reading it steers clear. Because again, following Chris Fox's thing, you want just the people who are that kind of reader to be reading it. You don't want some random guy who normally likes crime reading it, even if they might like it, because they're then polluting your data, and Amazon doesn't know what kind of book you're writing. So then I was like, so with titles, I'm like, I think I've been considering a long time. So I changed The Bite on the Line. That used to be called The Bite on the End of the Line, and the series is called Bitter End.
Right.
So with my new theories, and it's not like I'm selling masses, so take that with a grain of salt. But that's completely wrong. The Bite on the Line, what the hell does that mean? That's nothing to do with fantasy. And bitter end is a makey-uppy word. That's just the name of the town. So, it's not spelled bitter end. It's spelled BYTAREND. Same as Your 6 Queen.
Right.
So no one knows what the hell that means. And even people think it's some kind of a pun. And think, oh, I hate puns. So it's not really helping me at all, really.
Right.
It's much better than the original title. The original title was Jolly Town Patrol. Because the town was going to be called Jolly Town. And then, thankfully, people talked me out of that. They went, that sounds like a children's book. Which, it does. It's like Noddy Goes to Big Town or something. Like so you would have got kids picking it up by accident. And then, what does this mean, Daddy? He buried his axe in the guy's head.
So if you were about to, and this just seems to be mirroring, if you knowing what you know now, if you were able to speak to yourself in between writing your first book in the bitter end and your second, would you continue on with that and do as many as you did, or would you take what you've learned and moved on to another project?
I think if I had not written as much as I've written, then I wouldn't have been good enough to write the things I'm now planning on writing. So the thing I'm planning on, the thing I'm talking about on the military sci-fi side that I wanted to write, back in 2013, I think was when I came up with it, maybe 2014. And I had time then, so I hadn't started as many series as I have now. But I thought, I'm not a good enough writer to write it yet. Because the book that I'm imagining, it's set in space, obviously, but it's going to be multiple perspectives, and some of the main characters, some of the point of view characters are going to die, which really scares me because I am not George R. R. Martin, so I don't know that I'm good enough to keep people reading after their favorite character dies. But at the same time, the plan I have for it at the moment, and it's only very kind of sketchy at the moment, there's a lot of things that are going to go wrong. The good guys are not going to win all the time. I don't want it to be aping Game of Thrones, but at the same time, I really like the way that Game of Thrones doesn't consider anyone sacred. I've spoken, I think, about it before. I think Jon Snow coming back to life was a big mistake. I spoiler alert, too late, I guess, for Game of Thrones, but it is a year ago now, or 6 or 7 months ago at least. So I thought the whole thing they had going was anyone could die. So, and still, I mean, they still have that air to it. Like Jon Snow, I don't know if you were watching the latest. Did you watch the latest season of Game of Thrones?
I watched him. Yeah, I watched him come back to life, and yeah.
But did you watch the battle where
his brother?
He's trying to rescue his brother.
Oh yeah.
So, spoiler again, but like in the bit where he's down in the mud, I was still thinking, oh, this could be it. He could be dead, but because he'd come back to life, I thought, yeah, but he's not. Like, he's now the hero who's going to survive all the way to the end, which kind of spoils the whole spell of it. So anyway, so I want to write that and plan it so well that people can be dying up until the last book in the series and still have a way of making a satisfying ending out of it. So it's going to be incredibly tough to write, but hopefully will work out.
Which brings us to the names, being vested in characters. You're being vested in those characters, it's tougher to kill them.
Yeah, I mean,
it's easy to kill John Smith. It's a whole lot harder to kill somebody that you spent a whole afternoon trying to consider the name of and came up with a backstory of and did a character synopsis of, and then you kill them. It's easy to kill somebody that's a, Joe the Watchman is easy to kill.
Well, names is tricky in that, I change names sometimes, not a lot of the time, but sometimes when I get to the end of a book. And that's quite tricky because you already think of that person as a real person. So then changing their name. So in the Bitter End books, I had a character called Tabitha Dead Whisper. But then there's another character called Tonbert. So Tonbert and Tabitha are too similar. They're both long names and they both start with a T. Yeah. That I went, they can't both be main characters because their names are too similar. So I changed it here to Lila because Tonbert had already come out in books. So her name then became Lila. And for a long time I was like, yeah, but that's not really her. So it took a while to kind of change. So you're right that it's better to consider the names at the start. And I think definitely put all the names together of every character in the book, especially main characters, and make sure they're not similar to each other. Every single character should start with a different letter if possible. If you have more than 26 main characters, then geez, you got more problems than just names. But
my editor actually pointed out to me that I made a secondary antagonist in a science fiction space military series. He was named the same as a throwaway character in 16 Queen. I named, and he said, so I guess that this guy's gonna die badly, isn't he? Because he's named after so and so. I went, wow, talk about a Freudian slip.
Well, that's tricky as well because you have to come up with lots of different characters for lots of different books. So if you write enough books, then you're going to end up with the same character name used more than once. And I'm always doing that where I come up with a name and then I go, why is this familiar? Why does this sound like, am I copying, like, I'm not saying Jack Reacher, but like, say I wrote Jack Reacher and I'm going, that's really familiar. Where have I heard that before? And then I have to do a Google search to make sure there isn't another book character called that. And at the same time, you can't use a unique name. I don't know if you know that. If you use a name where there's only one person in the world with that name, they can sue you.
Really?
Yeah. So if there's a name like John Smith, no one can sue you because no one can say, you mean me. They would say, you just say, well, there's 6 million John Smiths. How do you know I mean you? Whereas if it was Fondlebert Bumperdink, and there was someone called that, and they're the only person called that, they can go, you mean me. And you can't go, I don't mean you, I mean, someone else, because there is no one else. So once it drops, so it's TV and movies really that have to worry about this more. But once it drops under a certain number in the world, so Simon Canton, for instance, there's only 3 of us in the world. So if you call the character Simon Canton, it would be very difficult not to say that you meant me. You would have to say, I didn't mean you, I meant, there's a guy in France called Simon Canton, he's like 19 years old, and there's, I don't know, another guy. It'd be very difficult to say you didn't mean me.
And your name is not that unusual for throwing together syllables and letters, and I could see somebody coming up with Simon Canton. It's not like you're out in left field, like you're a fantasy or a science fiction name. If somebody was just throwing together alliterative sounds, they could come up with Simon Canton.
Yeah, and I wouldn't sue them.
No, I got
even
so
if they
many
were even if they were writing about me, but the other two Simon Cantons, they could conceivably say, "You're denigrating my name," because there's only three of us. So it sounds like say someone wrote about some serial killer and called them Simon Canton. They could say, well, now everyone in the world thinks that Simon Canton is a serial killer. Like, say it became as big as James Bond. Like, even there's tons of James Bonds in the world. It must be a pain in the ass to be called James Bond, because everywhere you go, you say, hey, I'd like to check in. The name's James Bond. Oh, you mean Bond? James Bond? Like, it would just get so irritating to hear that every day of your life. That you just go, no.
You mean like being named Ed Sullivan?
Oh yeah.
Not. I've at least got a generation removed, but
yeah. And as well, like you've got most of the people outside the States, I guess, would not know who. Like they would have heard about Ed Sullivan, but wouldn't have watched him.
I'm actually getting some relief because the people that remember him are dying.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So yeah, that doesn't help me for Google, but yeah, because it's still a huge trail of the name. But at least I don't have to every time I show my license or a credit card have somebody crack a joke about a mouse puppet or introducing the Beatles or. You know.
Well, one thing you could do, you could do the Topher Grace thing. He's called Christopher Grace, but he uses the second half of his first name. So instead of Ed Sullivan, you could be Ward Sullivan.
Ward Sullivan.
I don't know.
Interesting. That sounds very old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that would work for science fiction or fantasy. Yeah. The problem is my middle name is Michael. Michael Sullivan's not getting me any instant notoriety. That blends in, and the only thing I've ever come up with is I'm saving in reserve Eddie Sullivan. That would have some distinctness, but other than that, it's pseudonym time. I mean,
well, Ted is also short for Edward.
Ted, yep, yeah, but that's not out there for recognizable stuff either. I probably wouldn't end up on the first 10 pages of Google. So now no. I have the first 5 pages for David Ulner Slew because it's a completely made up name. That's just an anagram of my full name, and not only that, but it sounds like South African Dutch or something.
Well, that's what I always wonder about the 2 other guys called Simon Canton, because I'm dominating Google because both of them are just normal people.
Right.
They're going, oh, for F's sake, this stupid author guy with his crappy books filling up Google.
Every time somebody wants to find them for a job interview or something, are you the guy that writes these books? No.
Oh, I heard a scary thing actually on Facebook this week where someone said that they accidentally let their website, their domain name, lapse for 12 hours. So they realized it within 12 hours and it had already been snapped up. So their name, they can't use their name anymore because someone is like, yeah, if you give me $1,000, I'll give it back to you.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
So I'm like terrified that someone's going to take simoncanton.com. But anyway, so back to naming things. I think character names, place names, all that kind of stuff. What I generally do is I go to fantasynamegenerator.com. I know this sounds like a complete cheat, but
no.
Oh, fantasy name generators. It's all the one word, .com. I can is there any way I can put in my lower third. Hang on a sec. Can you see it there?
Hang on. I'm coming
if I
back to you.
Put it on me.
No.
No? Oh, I can see it on my screen. Anyway, fantasy name namegenerators.com.
I know that one, and
yeah, but that one's excellent. He has names for everything: place names, fantasy names, real names, all that kind of stuff. And then I just keep hitting the randomize button until I get something that I like. So it's not exactly. So I heard like J.K. Rowling was, putting all this research into it, looking into Old English, and Dumbledore, I think, is an old name for a bee, and all this kind of stuff. But I just hit the thing until there's a nice sound to it, really.
Mm-hmm.
The Scrivener also has a built-in name generator, but it's kind of limited. Like, it runs out of names fairly quickly. So that's for places and things like that. And then, as I say, books, I tend to concentrate on conveying the genre. Pseudonyms we could talk about. So I have a pseudonym out there.
Mine's an anagram. Mine's simple.
Yeah, I have a hidden pseudonym that I used for a erotica book. It sold 2 copies ever in 3 years or something. Frankly, I think it's a waste of time to have a pseudonym if you have your own name, unless you are immensely prolific. So if you're bringing out 3-4 books a month,
right,
then you need a pseudonym because you look ridiculous bringing out 4 books a month. No
right.
reader can keep up. Like, that means a reader has to be just reading you and no one else. So then splitting it so that it seems like there's 2 authors writing, or if you want to do something like that, write erotica, or write something that's really, like, if I suddenly said I wanted to write crime, I would use a pseudonym. I wouldn't use my own name. Even we've mentioned on previous podcasts that it's even kind of surprising to me and Dave, and maybe to you, Ed, that people don't read across genres as much as.
No, I guess we're the weird ones, because I always did too. I do constantly.
I don't know whether it's a generational thing, because when I'd be going to the library, and I would look at the science fiction section first, and then I'd have read everything that's there. So then I go to the fantasy section, and I've read everything that's there. So then I'm like, all right, fine, Agatha Christie, or what can I read that I haven't read that is close, that is anything to do with speculative fiction.
Right.
So I wonder whether it's that in those days when I was a kid, we were limited because there was only the books that were in the library.
Yeah.
And when we started going to a whole new library, a different library, I had so many new books. I was like, what should I take out? I don't know what to take out. Right. Whereas these days, everything is ebooks and ordering online, so you can have anything. You can just read your genre for the rest of your life if you want to.
Instant gratification too. It's not like you have to go to the library or bookstore. You can download 3 science fiction books and tuck in and not have to do anything for days.
Yeah. So I wonder about that. But then a lot of the people on my list, at least, are in their 60s or older. I did a previous survey just asking people, and everyone's pensioners in my email list, which was interesting. I don't know whether that's just the genres that I picked. I guess science fiction and fantasy were bigger genres, I guess, before than maybe they are now. But I think that's changing anyway.
Maybe I think it goes in cycles. I can remember where it was huge, and then it kind of went away. And then, I mean, if you think about it, fantasy and science fiction was huge. It was Star Wars. And then it didn't seem like it was big for a while. It was action and detective. And
I mean, that's true. So we had science fiction, 70s and then early 80s.
Yeah.
Then it was kind of Bruce Willis and Schwarzenegger and that kind of thing. The 90s, I don't know, it was kind of a lot of indie movies, but it's down to what you're watching as well, of course. And then 2000s has just turned into a blockbuster fest.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, now you're talking Game of Thrones on the fantasy side. Westworld just launched this year and is massive now already.
Right.
The Expanse, which was funny. I was looking at the comments for The Expanse, and people were saying, why is no one watching this when it's an amazing show? And people were saying, sci-fi has said for the last X number of years that every show that's coming out is the most amazing science fiction show you've ever seen. It'll blow your socks off. It's the biggest thing ever. That no one believes them anymore. So now they have a show that is excellent. Like it's not quite Game of Thrones level, but it's just under there. And no one believes them. No one's watching. So it's, in danger of getting cancelled. And then it's going to be like Firefly. Everyone's going to go, oh, why did this get cancelled? Find it 5 years later and not know why there isn't 10 seasons. So yeah, I mean, that's about all I have for naming things. I don't know if you have more comments, Ed.
No. I mean, I use generators to use different ones. Much more difficult with titles than with places or people. I learned something. I didn't know you couldn't use a completely unique name. So
yeah, I mean, so there is no copyright on names generally. You can trademark. So James Bond might be trademark for spies, but if you had James Bond the accountant or something in your book, especially if it was just like, yeah, I've heard all the jokes, blah blah blah, like you're acknowledging that James Bond the spy exists, like as a fictional thing, then I think you can get away with it. But yeah, if someone's name is completely unique, you can't. And on titles, as I say, I would be less hung up on getting a killer title. Like, so a great example, I always mention this as the example, is the Beatles. So the Beatles is an atrocious name for a band. Like, they're a great band. I'm not saying they're bad musicians or bad whatever.
Right.
But as a name, it's a pun about Beatles and Beatles. It is terrible as a name. But no one cares. No one notices because they just hear the Beatles, the Beatles, the Beatles. So if you called your book something atrocious, if it's good enough, no one's going to care. On the other hand, the show that was a great example of bad names was Scrotal Recall. I don't know if you've heard of that show, Ed.
That sounds familiar.
So there was a show on Channel 4 in the UK called Scrotal Recall, and it's a very sweet romantic comedy. So Scrotal Recall sounds like it's like a frat guy kind of comedy or something like that.
Right.
So no one watched it. Netflix bought the rights to it and renamed it Lovesick because it's a romance. Like, you call it like something with love in the title. So they call it Lovesick, and now it's become slightly more popular, much more popular. Like, they've made the second season. They're already planning the third season because it's good. But with a name like Scrotal Recall, the target audience were never going to look at it. Like, I'm probably the exception because I like romancy things sometimes. I don't like the crappy Runaway Bride kind of stuff, but I do like soppy kind of romance. So Lovesick made me watch it. If it was still called Scrotal Recall, I wouldn't have watched it because I would have thought it was some juvenile kind of, fart joke thing.
Huh. Why was it called that? Is there some meaning that I'm missing, or were they actually talking about scrotums?
So the premise of the show, and it's just a kind of a framework thing, but the premise of the show is that the main guy finds out that he has chlamydia. So he has to contact all of his ex-lovers and tell them that they need to get checked and maybe get cured. So what it is that then each episode at the start, he's contacting one of his ex-lovers, and he's like a very soppy guy who wants to talk to him in person. So it then does a flashback of his romance with that woman, and then cuts to the present, and kind of show it cuts back and forth, present and past, to kind of show the romance of that partnership. And then at the same time, the overarching thing is a kind of a Ross and Rachel, will they, won't they, in the present time, where, they're constantly getting in each other's way and the usual romance thing.
I don't feel as bad about my ability to name things anymore. I just don't. That makes me feel much better. That is really not a good name for that show at all.
No. So as I say, what you want, number one thing for a title of a book is just that it says to the reader what the genre is, and then the rest of the book can kind of make up their minds as whether they like it or not.
Right. Wow. Well, that's
and I think as well, like, sitting on it for a while is a good idea. Like, this is another thing that can be tested. So you might have a title and then come up with a bunch of them. If you have a mailing list, or even, a bunch of friends and family or something like that, and you say, and what you should be saying to them is not which title do you like, but which title says to you that this is the genre. Like, so my book is about guys fighting in space, or, it's like Star Wars. Which of these titles would make you think Star Wars, or would make you think, romance, or would make you think whatever it happens to be? That's I think the number one job of the title. Again, though, like, I haven't sold massive amounts of books, so I could be completely wrong, but that's my kind of take on it.
I wonder if you could set up, like, how you had your survey before you send your beta readers the book. You send them 3 titles and you say, click the title that you want to read, or click the title that says to you military sci-fi, and you give them 3 titles, and then when they click the one that says that to them, they all get the same book, but they're clicking the title that does what you want.
Well, that's another thing I'm thinking about. This is app ideas, but what I would love to have is make 5 covers. So if you make covers yourself, obviously if you're commissioning covers, you can't have 5 different covers because you're talking thousands of dollars. Right. But if you make them yourself, if you make 5 covers and then send a lot of advertised people to it, like advertise on Facebook or whatever, send people to that page, and then randomly show different covers when they get to the page, and then see which one they gets the most response. Like, especially if you send the right audience. Like, say if I write military sci-fi and I send like a David Feintuch's audience or whatever it happens to be, and I get that one of the covers got 40% clicks and the others all got like 10% clicks, then I know I'm on the right track. At the same time, if I've got 40% clicks, I would say, well, that's not good enough. You want much higher. And the same with the titles. Like, if you wanted, you could have 5 covers that are all your book with 5 different titles, 5 different product descriptions, and see which one people click on. And each of the books just goes to the same. Each of them goes to the same book on Amazon. Now that's going to be confusing for people because they clicked on whatever the title was, and they get to something with a different title. So you might need to kind of explain it in some way. You could say, like, you could have a page that pops up for 5 seconds that just says, rewriting your book to your book now. This book has had a change of name, so is currently called blah, Hard Vacuum, or whatever it happens to be. So then that explains to people why when they get there it's called Hard Vacuum. So you have 5 completely different names. You can't have one of them be Hard Vacuum, the others be different, something different. And then you'd get a response to know which is the best. But I don't know. As I said, I don't want to dedicate all my time next year to the app. If I could avoid it, I want to write stuff.
No, you're doing this to write. And you've already done quite a bit on the app. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, the app was kind of the number one problem was to find out what was wrong, why people stopped reading my books. So the app has kind of solved that. And then whatever other little bits and pieces I can put in that don't take a lot of time to put in, I'll do. And then once I get to the stage where I'm trying to sell stuff, then I'll put in the selling stuff. It's a very, egotistical way of making it, but it's kind of the whole point of it is to make it for me.
That's really, why would you put that much work in it if it wasn't for you? Unless you were trying to monetize the app, which you never said at any point you were trying to build an app to make money, because then you'd be a web developer, you'd be a developer, you wouldn't be trying to be an author. You're trying to be an author here. So,
well, that's the thing. Like the Scrivener guys said that they built Scrivener because they wanted to be authors, and now they have to spend all their time upgrading Scrivener and working on Scrivener.
Yeah.
What I don't want that to happen to me. Like that's what my whole point about like releasing buggy stuff, and then just with when people log in or the terms of service or whatever just says this is a buggy piece of crap and it's going to fall over, but tell me when it does and I'll try and fix it.
Right.
Because I don't want to end up like the Scrivener guys. The whole point is to become an author, not become an app guy.
Right.
That said, like I have mentioned before, I'll start charging for the app when there's enough stuff there and it's stable enough that it's worth people's money.
Sure.
But it's not going to be massive amounts of money either.
No.
And at the moment it's free. So anyone who's watching or listening, go to writertracker.com and register and use it for free.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, we kind of come to the end of our normal time.
Now that flew by. That was
yeah. So was there anything you wanted to add at the end, Ed?
No, I mean, it'd be great if people went out and especially if they have Kindle Unlimited, if they would give some of Cheap Jack Pulp's back issues a glance. There's good stories there. I'm about to put up September's, and September has a quite lengthy adventure detective kind of story written by a guy that actually has that won an Emmy with Steven Spielberg. He wrote a science fiction miniseries with Steven Spielberg and executive produced it, and he actually wrote for me. How I got him to write for me, I don't know. He came to me, and he wrote, and he's a pretty successful screenwriter and actually a successful musician out on the West Coast, and that'll be going to print soon. But other than that, I've got some awesome writers. If people wanted to look, especially like I said, if you've got Kindle Unlimited, you're paying anyway. I'd like it if they could just take a look, because then they could help support the magazine. So,
yep, absolutely. For me, like as I say, I'm now kind of thinking I'm better off without readers who aren't genre specific. So, you can certainly read my stuff. I'm not going to scream at you, but I don't really want to promote stuff unless it's to the guys who read that genre. But yeah, use Writer Tracker if you want to. Okay, so we'll wrap up. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.